He was giving my 8-year-old too much attention. He wanted her to buy these really tall shoes that were women's shoes, and I told him no.
What would you do if a complete stranger offered to buy your daughter dresses and take her for a McDonald's snack? It sounds tempting, but something just feels off. Most of us would probably trust our gut and say no. But sadly, that wasn't the case for Cherish Periwinkle. Cherish, an innocent 8-year-old, was brutally essayed and left dead in the bushes just hours after her mother accepted this stranger's offer. And the man responsible? He had a dark past that led to one of the most tragic outcomes imaginable. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why this case is one of the most heartbreaking and haunting we've ever covered. In fact, the judge had to take a break during the jury deliberations due to the graphic and disturbing nature of the evidence. It raises so many questions, especially considering the killer had been released from jail just 3 weeks before Cherish's murder. Why was he free to commit such a horrific crime? Let's dive in and find out. Cherish Lily Periwinkle was born on December 24, 2004, but her life was chaotic from the very start. Her parents, Rain and Billy, met at a bar, and Cherish was the result of a one-night stand. Neither of them had planned for Rain to get pregnant, but when she found out she was expecting, she decided she would keep her daughter. Now, Rain's friends described her as erratic but excited during her pregnancy. She told everyone different stories about the father. Some thought Cherish's dad was a past boyfriend who abandoned Rain when he found out she was pregnant. Others believed Cherish was the result of a one-night fling with a man who vanished after Rain refused to get an abortion. The truth, however, was much more complicated. Rain didn't tell Billy about Cherish until she was 3 years old, and she only did so because she was suing him for child support. Billy was shocked but excited. He wanted to be part of his daughter's life, but Rain had other plans, and their relationship quickly turned into a bitter custody battle that lasted most of Cherish's life. Billy wanted to make up for lost time and be present for his daughter, but Rain did everything she could to block him. She even claimed in court that Billy had been absent for the first 3 years of Cherish's life and was only interested in her now because of financial benefits. Despite these accusations, Billy never gave up. To settle the dispute, the court brought in a custody evaluator, Robert H. Wood. He spent months observing both Rain and Billy with Cherish. His report showed issues on both sides. Billy hadn't bonded with Cherish due to the time they'd missed, but he had a stable job and reliable income. Rain, on the other hand, often neglected her children, especially when she was around boyfriends or other men, and she had emotional outbursts tied to her bipolar disorder. In the end, the court decided that Cherish should stay with Rain because they already had a bond, and Cherish had siblings. Even though the evaluator recommended Billy could provide more stability, the court's decision left Cherish in her mother's care, a decision that would have devastating consequences. Now the whole crime began when Donald Smith noticed Rain in a store. He saw her telling her daughters that she couldn't buy them what they wanted at a Dollar General in Jacksonville, Florida, and recognized a chance to exploit her situation. Rain was an overwhelmed mother, making her an easy target for Smith's manipulation. And I'm not here to judge, but let's take a moment to consider Rain's perspective. For someone with financial stability, turning down a stranger's offer for a $100 shopping spree might seem easy. But when you're struggling to make ends meet, it's incredibly tough to say no. Predators like Smith understand this and exploit the vulnerability of parents who are overwhelmed and desperate. Unfortunately, that's exactly what happened to Rain and her daughter, Cherish. The Periwinkles got into Smith's white van and went to Walmart, where they spent 2 hours shopping. At around 10:30 p.m., Smith offered to buy them cheeseburgers at the store's McDonald's, and Cherish followed him. However, surveillance footage showed them leaving the store instead, marking the last time Cherish was seen alive. About 30 minutes later, Rain reported her daughter missing to the police, and an Amber Alert was issued 5 hours later. Tragically, the next morning, Cherish's body was discovered in a creek behind Highlands Baptist Church. Before we dive into the disturbing details, Let's take a moment to understand the killer and why he raised red flags from the very beginning. Several psychologists who have evaluated Donald Smith over the years describe him as one of the most troubling child predators. He experienced serious brain damage and changes at a young age, partly from a head injury that affected the right side of his brain. His life was also shaped by a mix of sexual abuse, extreme drug use, and unhealthy relationships within his family. And when I say unhealthy relationships, I mean that his family didn't see him as a son, but in a troubling way. From the moment he was born, he was mistreated by his father, who fortunately died early on. However, this led to his mother becoming uncomfortably close with him, treating him more like a partner than a child. In one instance, after the death of one of Donald's stepfathers, he spent over $100,000 in just 1 week on various illegal substances. His mother, however, refused to acknowledge that her son had a substance abuse issue. It's important to note that Smith certainly understood right from wrong, but after multiple evaluations of his brain and neurological symptoms, professionals concluded that he lacked basic impulse control. But perhaps the most troubling signs came when Donald was just 10 years old. He began to expose himself publicly, going to parks, playgrounds, and places generally occupied by children, showing the most disturbing parts of his body to everyone he came across. Sadly, as he got older, he began to touch himself, taking delight in the terror and confusion he created. By the time he was 18, he was well known for this behavior, but it would be another 3 years before he was arrested for pleasuring himself in front of a child at a park. Donald Smith served 5 years in prison and was released in 1987. Before his release, many professionals warned that he should never be let back into society because he couldn't be rehabilitated. Joseph Wu describes Smith's situation as a perfect storm of abuse and trauma, making him a constant threat, especially to young children. Smith knew his actions were wrong and harmful, but he enjoyed causing fear and pain. Despite these warnings, Smith was released. Shortly after, on September 1992, he tried to kidnap a 13-year-old girl named Carrie Ann Buck. Smith approached her in a van while she was walking to a friend's house. He tried to convince her to get in, but when she refused, he cursed at her and demanded she come with him. Carrie Ann ran to her friend's house with Smith chasing her in his car. No one answered the door, so she ran to a nearby school playground and hid in a tube slide, pressing her body against the plastic to stay hidden. Smith searched the playground, calling out for her, but he didn't find her. After what felt like forever to Carrie Ann, Smith finally left in his van. She waited a bit longer to make sure he was gone, then ran back to her friend's house where they called the police. Later on, the 13-year-old girl saw Smith's van in her neighborhood and ran to tell her mom. The pair followed his car, writing down his license plate information to give to the police. But before they could, Carrie Ann said that Smith saw her, immediately recognized her, and looked as if he was about to harm her. This failed kidnapping attempt resulted in Donald being sent to prison again, this time for attempted kidnapping and 2 counts of possessing obscene material with the intent to sell, which included child sexual abuse images. He was sentenced to 6 years for the first charge and 5 years for the other 2 counts. And after being released in 2003, Smith was arrested again and released in 2007 at the age of 51. He moved back in with his mother, who refused to acknowledge that her son was a sexual predator. She insisted to everyone she knew that he wasn't at fault for any of the crimes he had committed and believed he had been framed by others. She introduced Donald to many people in her community who described him as a nice, funny man. Despite being a known sexual predator, he seemed more or less normal to them. Many women found him charming and charismatic, allowing him into their homes to work as a handyman. They were aware of his history, as his mother told them about it, but they felt his openness about his crimes showed growth and good moral character. Unsurprisingly, Smith hadn't stopped preying on children. On January 11, 2013, a call came into Crime Stoppers about Smith. Someone had seen the white-haired man lurking around a His behavior was so peculiar that the caller felt the need to alert authorities and give them his description. Little did they know, just 10 days later, the serial offender would go on to commit an unthinkable crime. On June 21, 2013, Rain, along with her 2 daughters, left the home she shared with her boyfriend to walk to Dollar General. They needed to buy groceries and supplies for Cherish, who was excitedly preparing for her trip to California the next day to visit her father. Rain only had $100 in her account, money her boyfriend had given her to get Cherish to the airport. She was determined to make that money stretch as far as possible. While shopping, Cherish spotted a dress covered in hearts and begged her mom for it, saying she really wanted to wear it for her trip. Rain searched for the price tag but couldn't find it. After asking an employee, she discovered the dress was too expensive. Heartbroken, Rain had to tell Cherish they couldn't buy it, which upset the little girl. What neither Rain nor Cherish knew was that Donald Smith had been watching them. He saw the interaction and began to come up with a plan. After putting the dress back and buying their other items, Rain and her daughters walked outside, where they were approached by Donald. He mentioned he heard Rain tell Cherish they couldn't get the dress and offered to help.
I feel like pinching myself because this is too good to be true. He was giving my 8-year-old too much attention. He wanted her to buy these really tall shoes that were women's shoes, and I told him no.
At this point, most people struggle to side with the mother. Many wonder how she didn't foresee the danger, especially since she admitted that something felt off. She mentioned that it seemed too good to be true when Donald showed so much interest in her child, and there are multiple reports that he even went into the dressing room with her daughter. Can you believe that? What's even more shocking is that she didn't stop her child from following him when he promised to buy them McDonald's. It's hard not to question everything in this situation. Despite facing financial difficulties, a parent's instinct about their child being in danger is something that shouldn't be ignored. After 30 minutes without hearing from them, she finally called the police.
911 Robinson.
Hi, I'm at Walmart. I'm in turn. I think my daughter's been taken.
What do you mean?
Taken by a stranger. I can't find her.
And at 11:36 p.m., the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office issued the first BOLO for Cherish Periwinkle and Donald Smith's white van. Officers reviewed surveillance footage showing Cherish and Donald together inside Walmart and confirmed they left in his van. They identified Donald from the video. However, an Amber Alert wasn't issued until 4 a.m. the next morning. This emergency response system is designed to quickly inform the public about missing persons, using media broadcasts and electronic signs. It's proven effective in locating endangered individuals, as it alerts everyone in the area to be on the lookout. Given that the police knew what Cherish and Donald were wearing, the vehicle he drove, and how long it had been since they left Walmart, issuing an Amber Alert right away could have brought in numerous tips and possibly saved Cherish's life. Unfortunately, this didn't happen. The media also wasn't informed about the missing child until an hour after the Amber Alert. It would be 3 hours later before a concerned citizen, having seen the news report, called in to report a suspicious vehicle matching the one on TV at Highlands Baptist Church on Rutgers Road. They mentioned seeing a white van but weren't sure if anything had happened because they knew a girl had just been abducted from Walmart. 20 minutes later, Donald's car was spotted on the highway and was pulled over. However, Cherish was nowhere to be found. Donald was soaking wet when he was arrested, and when asked where he had been all night, he claimed he had been smoking crack cocaine with prostitutes and that he sweats heavily when using drugs. Based on the tip received, the first responding officer focused the search around the Baptist church, specifically in the marsh behind it. At 9:20 a.m. on June 22, 2013, Cherish Periwinkle's body was found. She spent the last terrifying hours of her life with Donald Smith. He restrained her, assaulted her, and ultimately took her life. The force he used caused severe injuries. Cherish did not pass away quickly or peacefully. It was a brutal and painful death. He gagged the poor child to the point that her gums and nostrils started bleeding and her eyeballs popped out, and she did not die right away. and he didn't stop until Cherish ultimately died. Afterwards, Smith moved her body through the woods, hid it under water and debris, and tried to ensure it wouldn't be found. However, his plans did not succeed. Despite overwhelming evidence against him, Donald decided to put Cherish's family through the torment of a trial. He knew he would likely face a life sentence, but craved the attention and a sense of control, so he pleaded not guilty. The nation was taken aback by the case and united in support of Cherish's family. Rain gave multiple interviews, expressing her belief that Donald should have been kept off the streets and that the justice system had failed both her and her daughter. However, public opinion about Rain was mixed. Many questioned why she allowed a stranger to enter her 8-year-old's dressing room and why she went with him in the first place. While some felt she had simply been too trusting, others couldn't ignore her erratic behavior during the interviews. In one interview, Rain went as far as to claim she was a psychic, asserting that she had predicted Cherish's death years earlier, saying, "I always knew Cherish would die when she was 8. However, less than a month after Cherish's tragic passing, her 2 youngest daughters were removed from Rain's care by the Department of Children and Families. While no specific reason was publicly given for the girls' removal, a spokesperson for the department stated that, in such cases, they aim to reunite parents and children when it is safe. After the removal of Cherish's younger sisters, Rain's past in Australia came to light, revealing that she had abandoned her first daughter before Cherish was born. This revelation horrified many. One family member expressed, "It just makes me feel sick. Her own daughter doesn't want anything to do with her. I've never wanted to have anything to do with her because of who she is. She's a bad mother." Rain's sister Carrie and her oldest daughter Lindsay both believe Rain is responsible for Cherish's death. Carrie stated, "It's terrible, but I think about it every day. I can't sleep. It feels like just yesterday." When asked who she blames for what happened to Cherish, Lindsay replied, "My mother, 100%. That pedophile was going to get any child he could." Because of this, Cherish's mother faced significant public backlash, with many blaming her for the incident. She continued to make public appearances, claiming she was working to regain custody of her younger daughters, but court records suggested otherwise. The girls remained in foster care for a year, with the courts giving Rain that time to devise a plan. She was instructed to secure a job and find suitable housing to regain custody of her daughters, but she never followed through. According to court records, after Cherish was murdered, Rain struggled to maintain stable employment, often facing rejection due to her circumstances and the stigma attached to what happened. Grieving the loss of her child, she found herself in a dark place. In a surprising turn of events, Rain's daughters were adopted by their estranged aunt in Australia. Both girls have reportedly adjusted well and are living happy lives with her. Meanwhile, during the trial, Donald Smith's defense was weak. His lawyers attempted to argue that Rain was more responsible for what happened to her daughter, claiming she allowed Cherish to go off with him. However, like in the case of Joel Guy Jr., they were overwhelmed by the mountain of evidence against him. Unsurprisingly, after less than an hour, Smith was found guilty and sentenced to death. But this was just the beginning of the story. Smith's trial began on February 12, 2018, more than 4 years after Cherish Periwinkle's tragic death. But before concluding their case, the prosecution delivered a final blow by playing secretly taped conversations between Smith and another inmate.
You know how old they are? About 12, 13. You can see their wine glass on her.
Donald Smith continued to speak freely in jail, revealing his intentions and plans. His behavior demonstrated a clear attraction to young girls and a propensity for violence. The jury quickly found him guilty on all counts after just 15 minutes of deliberation. The next decision was whether Smith would spend his life in prison or face the death penalty. During the trial, experts came forward to discuss Donald Smith's complicated background, highlighting issues with his brain and a troubling history of sexual abuse. They shared findings from imaging studies that showed significant shrinkage in his brain, hinting at possible neurological problems. These could include neurodegenerative conditions like CTE or frontotemporal dementia, as well as different types of epilepsy. Smith was diagnosed with orbitofrontal syndrome, a condition that often leads to behaviors like hypersexuality, poor impulse control, and repeated criminal actions. Despite these mental health challenges, experts argued strongly that Smith still had the ability to grasp the seriousness of his actions and the potential consequences they carried. The jury ultimately recommended the death penalty, and Judge Mallory Cooper imposed the sentence. After his conviction, recorded jailhouse conversations between Smith and his mother revealed another disturbing side of him. Smith seemed excited about the attention he was receiving and denied being a child molester, despite overwhelming evidence. He suggested that as a registered sex offender, he felt he had no choice but to kill Cherish when she followed him, a chilling admission that underscored his lack of remorse and the premeditated nature of his crime.
I told Harry, he says, man, he says, what she got in your van? All I knew was, you gotta go. You have to go. I don't care how, you gotta go.
Smith seems to be plotting a mental health defense, even going so far as to ask his mother for a copy of a manual on psychiatric disorders.
I mean, the mental defense, it's gotta be good.
It's shocking how manipulative he is, using his mother to try to gain favors and get out of jail. The truth is, if he were free, he would pose a serious threat to anyone. But at the heart of this case is the heartbreaking loss of a precious little girl. Cherish was a beacon of joy, always smiling, never showing any signs of unhappiness. If you ask anyone in Jacksonville, they'll tell you the same. It's unimaginable that an 8-year-old could be taken from us like this. We can only hope people remember her bright smile and the promising future she had ahead of her. She would have accomplished so much, but now we'll never know what could have been. As we've said many times on our channel, be careful with kindness from strangers. The world is a dangerous place, and you should always trust your gut feelings. Don't just follow anyone, no matter how nice they seem. If you want more videos like this, please be sure to like the video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on more true crime videos. Take care, and see you in the next one.